It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. Water access, very much in sharp focus. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to you, South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience are with us tonight. Good to have them on the program. Looking forward to their input in a short while. Chapter 2 of the Constitution of South Africa provides that everyone has a right to have access to sufficient food and water. Do you have access to sufficient water? Last year, Greenpeace said labeling the water situation at the time in South Africa as anything other than a crisis would be to downplay the severity of the problem, given South Africa is regarded as a water-scarce country. But working with what we have is the way water resources are distributed in the country up to scratch. What part do municipalities play in contributing to a community's water woes? When there is limited water access, it is the poor who suffer the most. Why? Because there's less of an ability to procure alternative water sources. Water security by 2030 and beyond, that's the goal. It leaves us with less than 7 years. What progress has been made in achieving this goal? We will discuss. Look, we have to talk, we have to debate, because at the end of that, the best idea emerges and we get to that better place that I always talk about. That's the goal. That's always been the goal here at It's Topical, which leads us to the question of the week. And we're asking you, is South Africa facing a water crisis similar to that of the rolling blackouts, the load shedding? And who is responsible? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Let's get you some context. Where's the gaps? Is it policy development, financing of infrastructure? What about operations and maintenance? Share your thoughts with us at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. All right, as always, let's get you some context and we turn to the magic wall, what we know and why it matters. Tonight, my guest is SABC News specialist researcher Janet Witten, joins me live. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Janet. It's an important topic. We need your better mind to break it down for us. And no doubt, there's been strides made, over the years with regards to the access of piped water. Look at the numbers. Piped water sources outside your yard, 96, it was about 19%, and now, in 2022, 8.9%.
I think we talk a lot on all of our shows and in news about service delivery, and this is one of the aspects of, it's the positive side of service delivery, if you like, where we have actually succeeded quite well in the last 30 years, because the access to water for people, particularly rural people and people in poorer areas, has definitely improved. So we have access to pipe water inside of the house. We have access to pipe water close. There are not a lot of people dependent on water from outside of taps. But this is important. This is important.
This tells a story in terms of why are we dependent on these tankers and water vendors, etc. Let's look at the other strides in terms of households getting piped water. Talk to us about the gains.
10.5 million people, I beg your pardon, 10.5 million households. That's important to notice. That's the majority of households in the country, both urban and rural. So a lot of people have access to piped water. The question that we'll get to in a short while is the quality of the water that they're getting, and that's important. No access to piped water, there's still 1.5 million households. That's still too many. So we still have some ways to go. That's 8.7% of the population. That's a lot of a lot of people who are still dependent on rivers to get their water. They go daily to a river to go and take water. The quality of the water in the rivers is not always great. So that is a and that's where exposure to disease, that kind of thing comes in, is from those people.
Because the consensus is that if you're abstracting from a polluted river, that's basically wastewater, right? I wonder how cognizant we are about the quality of our rivers.
I think that we're not. We are. You mentioned in your introduction that we were a water-scarce country, which means our water levels and our river levels go up and down, and when they're low, they tend to be of less quality. So when there's not a lot of water around, it's more difficult. The rivers contain more effluent. The effluent it's a lot more difficult for that effluent to be washed into an area where, to make that water clean again. And that's very difficult. So that is very important.
Talk to us about the challenges that we're currently facing with regards to the provision.
This has a lot to do with infrastructure. Unfortunately, our infrastructure is failing as far as water quality is concerned. The water quality, the one good thing that we do in this country, we have, you'll see at the bottom here, this is the source is the Blue Drop reports. We have a series of reports. The overarching report is the Blue Drop report. There's also a Green Drop report that looks at wastewater management. There's a No Drop report, which talks about water wastage. But in terms of the Blue Drop report, the quality of our drinking water is declining, and it's declining all over the country. And it's in a very serious state, particularly in the Northwest and Free State. That's where it's actually worst. In the Northwest, the percentage of controls is below 50%. So that means it's very serious, that the water treatment plants are just not functioning, and importantly, they have no future plans in place to actually fix them. So at the moment, it's not being fixed, and that's very serious.
What does that mean in terms of 50% of municipalities having no plans? How is that assessed?
It's assessed through, they have a series of, the Blue Drop reports have a series of risk factors. And one of the risk factors is plans in place to fix the problems. The Blue Drop reports are a very important step, because I mentioned to somebody, you can't fix what you don't know you don't know. So the Blue Drop reports are very important in us knowing exactly where the problems are, so that then we can target what needs to be fixed. So at the moment, we do know where the problems are, and many of these municipalities haven't got plans in place to fix the problems that have been identified.
Consequences. Talk to us. We know what happened in Hammanskraal. Over 20 people died. We've been there. We've seen it for ourselves. Issues in KwaZulu-Natal as well.
There were very similar issues here, even though the result was slightly different. In KwaZulu-Natal 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, that was gastroenteritis, which on a certain level, I suppose, is less serious because it's more easily treatable. Cholera is a very serious factor, and that was almost entirely due to the fact that these treatment works at Rooiwal don't function properly. And what was most concerning about that is that this was flagged 10 years ago. That there was a problem here. You mentioned the fact that we're drawing water from the rivers. The water comes from the rivers, it gets treated, it gets sent to households, it then gets sent to water treatment works, and those water treatment works put the water back into the river that people are drawing from. The water that was going back into the rivers in this area was not up to scratch because capacity, it was just completely overloaded. So there was untreated water getting returned to the rivers.
I wonder if it is an issue of the amount of water that South Africa has at its disposal as a natural resource, as opposed to the capacity or infrastructure that we have in order to meet demand. The amount of water that we have is a factor, but it's not the main factor. I think the infrastructure is certainly the main factor. But in terms of the amount of water that we had, we know that we had quite a serious drought countrywide in 2016, 2017. We saw what happened in Cape Town. A couple of years later, the same thing followed in Port Elizabeth, where we came very close to zero water. They talked about the day zero. That was coming. Since then, partly due to climate factors, La Nina came through, and El Nino we're now into El Nino. La Nina brings water, so we have slightly higher than average rainfall. We're now into
El Nino again. It shouldn't last too long, but it's going to be a strong one, which means that this early part of summer, in the summer rainfall areas in the country, we're not going to get as much rain as we're expecting. You and I can see it here in Joburg already. Our dam levels aren't serious yet. We're still looking at high 80 to 90% dam levels, but they're going to drop quite fast because we've got a lot of evaporation obviously happening with all of the heat. So that is a factor. But the main problem with the quality of the water, our problem is not the amount of water. We're kind of used to, we developed and we know how to live with the amount of water that we get. The problem is the quality of the water. And these kind of treatment works and the systems in place are important. Then you mentioned electricity. You know, the Rand Water says all the time that Joburg's water problems are created by the fact that the pump stations don't have electricity because of load shedding. And those affect all of these things. That affects not only pumping water to reservoirs, which is needed obviously to get the water to the household, but it affects treatment works and things like this as well. So all of it has a knock-on effect, which is quite serious.
We had the Minister of Water about 8 months ago saying that Joburg or Gauteng was short about 300 megalitres of water per day. How far have we come in terms of mitigating that? We will put it to the Minister. Janet Witten, thank you very much indeed for your time. All right. Context, really important here, right? We will discuss this further. We have the Minister of Water and Sanitation on the program. Janet Witten is SABC Specialist Researcher. Value added, no doubt. All right. To our word on the street feature, regular feature, we took to the streets of Johannesburg, obviously seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic, and this is what you had to say. Watch.
I think there is a water crisis in the city and all over the country, but I think the best way we can do it is to get people with the correct skills and manage the projects properly, and people with experience and people who know what to do. You know, not politicize what must happen.
It's poor planning, poor maintenance of the infrastructure, and then as well as it's too decentralized, the whole planning of everything. So I think if people plan better, maintain the infrastructure better, then it will be better. I think there's enough water. It's not adequately maintained and supervised that the people can have it.
There's leaks. These pipes are leaking here in Joburg. There's down that side in the south of Joburg. That side there's a big hole. It's been there with dirty water and it hasn't been fixed or anything. So they have to honestly look at lots of these things. I'm pretty sure it's something on top. The government needs to look at this, or maybe the mayor.
There are lots of other ways of solving water problems. You know, people can become self-sufficient. Entrepreneurs have a chance to put in modular water treatment systems and water purification systems and sell water at a reasonable cost. So you know, people don't have to rely on the municipalities.
I think the challenge revolves around the maintenance. So it feels like there are issues with supply. I mean, in Parkhurst as an example, we have a number of issues around supply to the households, and I think it's a maintenance issue, lack of maintenance for the most part.
All right, we really do appreciate your thoughts on this matter. Let's get straight into our discussions. Where are the avenues of opportunity? What about the Lesotho Highlands Water Project? How far are we in terms of mitigating or helping this current situation? The Minister of Water and Sanitation, Senzo Mchunu, is here. Dr Ferrial Adam, also from WaterCAN, Executive Manager. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We have a digital audience with us, as well as Philile Ntuli, who's our other guest, coming to us virtually, Commissioner at the Human Rights Commission. We do appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've got to get to that better place that we keep on talking about. Minister, to you first. And I mentioned earlier, we had you on the program 8 months ago. You said at the time that Gauteng was short about 300 megalitres of water per day. What plans were in place in order to augment that or make the situation better? Where are we?
Where we are now is where we've, through Rand Water, we've added 150 megalitres into the supply side. trying to mitigate that. Sometime next year, I'm sure before June next year, we'll add the other 150.
Right.
This is through the investment by Water in their Zekerbosch plant, which was undergoing refurbishment in order to try and meet the demand. So we're not far from closing that gap that we spoke about.
You were also in Limpopo recently.
Yes.
And you had engagements at the Sekhukhune district municipality.
Yes.
And I listened to you saying that, and something that just jumped out. Out of the about 285 workforce or so, there was just one engineer out of that lot. And the rest were lowly, as you put it, qualified. I wonder how prevalent this is throughout the country. What's your assessment?
It is a problem, and I think over years, what our municipalities have been doing as water service authorities, they have been looking at numbers more than looking at quality. Where you have a workforce of 800, for instance, in Gqeberha, you could, in my view, just after visiting that area for many times, maybe say your workforce is 650 or even 700 for that matter. And then you say the balance, you keep it for highly qualified people. Of course, they would need more money in terms of salaries and all of that because of their qualifications, but it is better. It is better and it's proven more and more by our visits when we go there. And you see that if you had somebody, 2 or 3, who are at the level of people that we come with, and they're able to sit down with them and say, look, instead of doing this thing this way, we should do it this way. And you can then see and hear that it's a skills level issue. And then we get the problems resolved. And unfortunately, we have to leave, go back with the people that would be from head office and so on, or from a water board. So very often, it is that case. We now have to discourage them, or maybe encourage them to say, let's not go for numbers, because water provision is quite a complicated thing. It's not like a road that you build and then you have to maintain in a way or two. Water needs to be maintained almost every hour, that managed every hour, and that's the infrastructure from inception. You've got to sit with it.
Right. Ferrial, numbers plus quality equals a happy community, right? It shouldn't be an either or. From your research on the ground, in terms of the capacity that the minister was talking about, how much of a factor does that play in terms of access to water?
It's a big factor in terms of access to water. And also, I think I was watching your earlier insert in talking about access and that 80% or 89% have access to water. I think we also have to be honest about how we define access. Having people walk 200 meters and beyond for water does not mean we have that access. And in terms of piped water taps in our households, it's about 40% or 46%. So I think that in terms of access, it plays a very important role, because you don't have that, you're going to have more and more of the infrastructure falling apart, and it affects the quality. So I think while we're saying that we don't have a problem with quantity, I think that we need to take into account that we're a water scarce country. So both our quantity and our quality is compromised.
Right. Minister, I mean, that's an important point. I mean, it looks good on paper when you say so many percentage have access, but if you have to walk such a far distance to get to that tap, I don't think that suffices as, improvement in terms of people's lives. How do you respond to that?
Well, if you look at South Africa and how how we've evolved over time in terms of providing all South Africans with water that is potable water everywhere in our country, you would say from that perspective, a lot of work has been done, and indeed you will find that it has been done. But we would have needed to move faster after starting to realize that we have been shortchanging a section of the population for decades, and then move fast and catch up with what would instead catch up with us. Now, so what I'm saying to you now is that we could have done better than we have done. Much as we say there is work that has been done, we could have done better. But realizing that we are moving with speed, catching up, and make sure that in terms of our obligations on SDG 6, which says no one must be left behind in the whole world without access to water. It could start with a communal tap, 200, which WaterCAN is talking about. But you need to start cutting all those things that in terms of us being backward. The numbers of people who have no access to water, the numbers of people who walk a distance. You need to cut and crowd in a situation where people have water either in their dwelling or even inside their houses. But dwelling is important.
Can I just add on that?
Go on, Doc.
I think it's a very important point, but also the statistics need to look at what's been happening in the last 2 years or so in South Africa, where you might have a tap in your house, and that's the statistic, right? You have a tap in your house, but how many people at this point actually have water coming out of those taps? And that brings that statistic even lower down of how many people have access to clean, safe drinking water in South Africa.
So what's the reality on the ground? Have you done some homework on
We haven't done the statistics on that, but I mean, if you look at Johannesburg, for example, in terms of the communities that have gone for extended periods of time without water, it's not only Johannesburg, it's a countrywide issue where you're having water cuts, whether it's infrastructure failing, whether it's polluted water, so you can't drink the water. We know that in Ugu district, we've been trying to get the regular testing results. It's not being given to us. So there are blockages all the way, but to get those actual statistics would be useful.
Let me bring in the Human Rights Commission's Philile Ntuli. Ms. Ntuli, you heard the minister saying that they are working with speed. Is that the reality on the ground where you are doing your work? What sort of complaints have you been receiving as the Human Rights Commission?
Good evening, Minister and Dr. Adam. The Commission conducts its work according to 3 programmatic areas: the promotion area, the protection area, and the monitoring of human rights. And according to the monitoring program, we are able to assess either the extent of access or deprivation of human rights. And through this program, our data shows that we should all as South Africans be rightfully concerned about the measures that organs of state are taking towards the progressive realization of human rights in the Bill of Rights, not just in relation to the right to water, but also the related rights of healthcare, food, the environment, social security, and so forth. But we have to place this within context according to the data we are receiving. And what we are seeing is the center of the concern is that South Africa can still be distinguished in line with what former President Thabo Mbeki termed as the 2 nations terminology, where those who have most access are those who were previously advantaged by the previous regime, and those who are most disadvantaged are still those who lack the most access. And of course, the majority of those being African women and children being the worst affected by access to water. And this is what our data is showing. But I also just want to emphasize the point made by Dr. Adam, that while we commend the government for increased access to piped water, we have to also look at how many of those with pipes in their household have actual water coming out of those pipes. And the complaints we receive are showing that many communities are failing to have access to that water.
Where are the
we
problem
also-
areas, Ms. Ntuli? Where are you investigating?
We have offices across the province. So across the 9 provinces, the Commission has a footprint, and we are seeing common trends across the areas where those mainly in rural areas, the former Bantustans, are the most deprived of their right to water, and those in the more urban locales have better access, even though that access, of course, due to issues of failing infrastructure,
Right.
is increasingly challenging.
I'll come back to you with regards to some of the reasons, or some would say excuses, that certain municipalities are giving you, if in terms of not being up to scratch in terms of quality. Minister, I wanted to just gauge from you, is it an issue? Of course, we're a water scarce country, right?
Yes.
We've got to that point of understanding. But is it a case that there's a lack of water, or is it an issue with regards to municipalities and how the system handles the demand?
It's certainly not so much a factor of South Africa being a water scarce country. I often sometimes use the word, we just have enough water for our needs. Just enough. We don't have plenty of water to play with and so on, because we're a water scarce country. But if you match the fact that we just have enough water available, for instance, you would go to an area, you'll find the dam is full, but people in the surroundings don't have water. So much as you would it would remain a fact that we're a water scarce country, but you go to that area, here is the dam, it is full. Here are communities, they don't have water. So how this problem has happened over time is that government nationally has overly relied on municipalities to do reticulation, that is the supply of water to households, over too long a period, and didn't observe quite specifically and sharply the decline on our municipalities to provide basic services, of which water is one. Now, that has happened over time. Now, we then, since 2021, said no, the whole thing is not so much about water not being available. It's your water service authorities, who are municipalities, their capacity to do what they are legislated to do, or and so on. But then we felt, if you continue beyond this point, relying exclusively on them, we're all as a country now going to go under the bus in terms of supply, when water is there, but we fail supply. It is for this reason that DWS National is making various interventions to work with municipalities almost everywhere in the country, almost everywhere. Because
what sort of interventions?
Well, the traditional intervention is that of giving them grants. 3 grants. One is ARBIC for their regional infrastructure. The other one is WISIC, which is for water service infrastructure. Now, it is more or less the same, just size of, but Treasury also supply them via provincial governments with MIC. Now, that's the traditional one. Now, we needed to have gone over that over time to say, what if you look at them 5 years ago, what are these grants, what have these grants achieved in terms of mitigating or reducing on the supply side? You will find that it doesn't match. The money doesn't match what has been achieved. There's a gap. So you need not only just to monitor from a distance in terms of what's happening with the grants, but you need to actually be there physically and make sure that a grant for water provision does exactly that, so that the money that we have is able to make a difference within a short space of time. That's what we need.
The huge thing is capital investment as well, isn't it? And monitoring is one part of making sure that we get to a place where that money is used for the right means. Is that your lived reality when your assessment of various municipalities?
I mean, I think it's definitely that. I mean, I think that municipalities have not spent enough on infrastructure maintenance, firstly. And of course, we're dealing with enormous water losses around the country. And, you know, just dealing with the water losses could save the country 20 billion rand. But having said that, I want to stress again that it doesn't matter if our dams are full. We do have a water crisis, and we need to understand that climate change is very real. And so we're going to impact, and as a country, we need to be more mindful of water, and we need to save.
Right.
And it's not, that is something where I think it's not just the Department of Water Sanitation, it's not local. Everyone has to be on board to actually work with water better.
Right.
But on the issues of the grants, so I agree. I think that the grants are important, and there are 2 grants that have been reduced and have been cut. So the urban settlement grant has been cut, I think, of almost 563 million, or to 563 million, and then the municipal infrastructure grant as well has been cut, right? It's not, when you give a municipality the grant, it's that amount's given to them.
Right.
But there's no ring fencing for water. So a lot of that could be spent on other things and not water. So I think what the department has to do is or the Treasury, when they give these grants, is to make sure that some of that money is ring-fenced only for water and sanitation.
Right.
That's what's needed.
I'll go to my digital audience next, but Minister, you agree with that in terms of ring fencing?
I agree with that. It is important. Remember that even that money, much as there would be a talk of municipalities not being given enough money, what we find quite often is that they are unable to spend even that money. Let's suppose it is little money, but they're not able to use the whole of it. They roll it back. This is our lived experience, and hence the need to go down, work with them as we are doing now, and there's no, so it's a question of not just using money for water, but also using the whole of it, just for water. But I just wanted to go to the fact that one of the things that are a setback in the sector is the fact that money that gets collected after all has been said and done doesn't all go back to water. It goes to other things. It goes to the salaries or maybe hams or something like that. You don't invest the whole of the money that you have collected in a municipality. You can't account for all of it. If you can, it will show that so much went elsewhere other than back to water. That's the problem.
So on that, So that's a very good point, because if we let's look at Joburg as an example, right? Joburg Water had a surplus on their books of about 12 billion, right? Well, City of Joburg and Joburg Water, and that's the money coming in from people paying for water. But Joburg Water gets a budget of about 1.5 billion, or if that much. So we're saying that if you've got 12 billion surplus, people are paying for water, we need to ring fence some of that money that's gone back into water. And understandably, there's salaries and etc. And let's be honest, there's mismanagement of funds and there's corruption. So I understand DWS is trying to get hold of that, but we, as activists, as people on the ground, need to also monitor that kind of corruption that's going on.
I need to take a quick break, but before we do that, I just want to get Philile Ntuli's take with regards to Ferrial. Adam says we're in the crisis in terms of water. Do you agree from your information received on the ground?
Yes, absolutely. I think when you measure it against the lived experiences of people on the ground, especially those in the former Bantustan, they would tell you that when they have to drink water with their animals, then certainly they are living amidst a crisis. But I also just wonder, maybe we can speak to this after the break. Just the issue of budgeting and financing in municipalities and the management of finances, especially vis-a-vis the grants that Minister mentioned. But we can do that for the break. Thank you.
And also, and I know it's something that you're very passionate about, is in terms of women in particular and their access to water in various communities. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about that in a short while. We're asking you with regards to water and municipalities, where's the problem? Who's responsible? What sort of lived experiences are you having in your community? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Quick break, more next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical, and we're talking about access to water. No doubt there's been gains made since '94 in terms of the provision of water, but it's the consistency of the provision, sustainable provision of water, that's at question here, and the quality as well. Let's take it to our digital audience, find out their thoughts on the matter. Raisa Noor Mohammed, I understand that you are at the all-important COP28 climate change conference in Dubai, and that's one of the big talking points, isn't it? Climate change real. Consequences of climate change we're experiencing every day. Your take with regards to how impacting on access to water here in South Africa?
Hi, yes, I am at COP28 currently, and I think one of the things that we need to talk about that isn't talked about enough is when it comes to the water that we currently have and where it's going, we need to interrogate quite deeply, because how is it that we're using so much, but yet so many people don't have access? And a lot of water goes into Eskom and into industries. And when we talk about saving water and holding people accountable, they definitely need to be held accountable, because when it comes to the climate crisis, everything is intersectional, which means everything is connected and feeds into each other. And so the fossil fuel industry, which is contributing so much to the climate crisis, is also taking up so much water. And that needs to be interrogated if we want to have equality.
Right. I was reading an article by Greenpeace saying that, about coal plants that require direct use of water at every step in terms of the system. So there's a huge amount of water that is pumped in, according to Greenpeace. Let's hear from Sia and then Mduduzi.
Well, I think for us, I think it's simple that, I mean, your specialist researcher earlier spoke about how 10% of the South African population is like without piped water. But I want to problematize that enough to say South Africa is actually wasting about over the global average, about 35 waters above global average. Right. And this is against our precipitation, which is also below global average, which is like the 860 So we find ourselves in a serious predicament. But at the same time, who's using this water? While you find that 65% of rural households, by the way, are dependent on borehole water, while we're getting that 13% of South African water is from borehole, and runoff is contributing to that 3%, while 65% of South African households in rural areas are dependent on boreholes. Right. So the question is, who's using the water? And we need to face this on the historical issue of industries, right? In the 1940s, we saw how this was happening around when in the 1940s, when manufacturing and mining servicing industries was booming in South Africa, and how water was used then, and how much water mining is using as compared to this. And this is the phenomenon that we're seeing in this day. So the question is, and by the way, in this 10%, government needs to still raise money for infrastructure.
Right.
Right.
So it's a question of who's using it. Is it business? Is it agriculture? I get you. In terms of who's using the limited amount of resources that we have, it's an important question. So yeah, thank you. Duduzi?
Thank you, Blaine, and good evening to everyone, the Minister, Dr. Ferrial, and Mrs. Philile Ntuli, and fellow comrades and border South African viewers. Blaine, I'm quite disappointed from where I'm sitting because partly I do welcome all the comments that were said before. Partly what Dr. Ferrial said, the numbers from the statistics earlier on during the program when we were starting, we heard about the statistics. Those are wrong statistics to start with, because like Dr. Ferrial has said, not everybody in the urban cities and spaces in South Africa have access to that water, in case the department is doing quite better. If that's what the minister said. Because, for instance, Vanderbilt Park in Vaal didn't have water for the whole of last week. So the minister, when they say they are doing quite better, it's actually an insult. For instance, the water tankers, that is not a solution, Blaine. That is not a solution for communities who have been excluded since before apartheid. It's not a solution for people to access water via, because it is happening in urban spaces. People will be carrying wheelbarrows tomorrow. I live in Sebokeng, whereby people, especially during these hot summer seasons, for the past 5 years now, people are carrying wheelbarrow to go and collect water. For instance, if the minister thinks the department is doing better, they might as well give us a feedback now.
Oh, we're losing you there,
Mdu.
But let's it seems that we don't have a good line to you, Mdu, but we got your point. Let's give the minister to answer in terms of Mdu's lived reality, saying that for a period of time they didn't have water, and he's not convinced that there's great strides that have been made.
Well, I respect what he's saying, but remember, he's making general points, and we need to put things in a context and say, in a particular municipality, is there an improvement or no improvement? And in the next, and as a country, therefore. But if you just say people are still this and this, I would say he's correct. But look at the numbers. What were the numbers in a particular year and so on? So I think one of the things that we need to begin to do now in the country is to not generalize water provision challenges. Those challenges are there. If, for instance, there were 5 days, with reference to the person he's talking about, what would have been a problem in that municipality that is responsible for provision of water in that area? It could have been in Naisna recently, because of the 6-hour load shedding, which they brought in recently. It depleted almost all of their reservoirs, and it brought the whole town into a kind of a problem. Now, if the problem lasted for 2-3 days or whatever number of days, you wouldn't say it is wrong to say we're doing better, because the reason is foreign, it's outside. It's load shedding that is higher than usual. It went up to 6 hours. So we need to contextualize the issues that we're talking about. But he's entitled to his opinion.
Let's go to Philile Ntuli. You've heard what Mduduzi had to say regarding his area, the minister's response as well, given the factors of the rolling blackouts, etc. And talk to us about the complaints that you're getting and some of the excuses that municipalities or reasons that they're giving you for the failure of provision of water.
I think the minister is right. The issue has to be viewed within its single particular context. And with regards to the issue at hand, while we talk of the water crisis, We are also faced with a local government crisis, being the dysfunction at local government level. And whereas local government institutions are either water service providers or water service authorities who are responsible for the provision of water, that dysfunction is naturally going to reflect itself in the experiences of the people on the ground. According to the latest State of Local Government report issued by the Department of Cooperative Government, for example, 66 municipalities across the country are in a state of dysfunction. And this dysfunction is rooted in a multi-pronged reasons, including poor governance, weak institutional capacity, poor financial management, which we have spoken about, corruption, and political instability. So when the minister says sometimes you have to go to the municipality in order to fix the problem, the question is, can the minister be able to go to all 257 municipalities or 66 municipalities that are dysfunctional? The answer is no. So then what then becomes the resolve here? And the key is consequence management. As a South African Human Rights Commission, we are not seeing enough consequence management at local government level, especially as it pertains to the issue of water.
Before I get a response from Dr. Adam, I know you're champing at the bit. Just talk to us, Ms. Ntuli, about the effects on women in particular in terms of their access.
Yes, absolutely. We know that women use water more than men. Women are the bearers of household duties. Women are the cookers, the watchers. They fetch the water, and they are the ones who are overall responsible for the well-being of household. Therefore, naturally, lack of access to water affects women and children most. In our work, we are finding that girl children are being deprived of their right to education because of issues of water. Girl children who are menstruating are unable to go to school during their menstrual period because of access to water. So there is a trickle effect due to the water crisis in the country that affects and exacerbates gender inequalities, which are historical in nature. And this, of course, is a key concern for us as a South African Human Rights Commission.
So that's the problem, Dr. Adam, when you have issues at the local government level in terms of provisions. This is what Ms. Ntuli is talking about, the consequences of that. Consequences of defaulting municipalities, is it adequately being handled?
Not at all. I think that's a very big challenge. I think that we need to see more on, and I agree completely with Ms. Ntuli that, you know, we know that municipalities across the country are failing. We know that the wastewater treatment works are not working, and the blue drop, green drop reports are going to be released this week. And we're going to, you know, it's going to be like really shocking statistics that come out there. We know that municipalities are just not doing what they need to do. Why has not one person been fired that is involved in actually making sure that water and sanitation at a local level is operating? It's up to activists and organizations like ourselves, where we've laid criminal charges against the city of Joburg, we've laid criminal charges at eThekwini, but you know, we want to see, it mustn't be, I know that the department is taking 14 municipalities to court because of this, but it has to be more than that. We need to make sure that it's not about municipalities then pay a fine for the pollution, because then the people who are there continuing to do the bad stuff and actually cause nonsense and then not be fired. There has to be consequence measures in place. But just to say, you know, in terms of wastewater treatment works, and when you look at and your earlier insert about sewage and the amount of sewage, when a wastewater treatment work is not functioning properly or not working at all, it's not only about the sewage that's going into our water, it's about antibiotics, it's about other things like hepatitis, it's about fertilizers and pesticides that are continuously polluting our water. And that links to what CEO was saying, is that there are other people using water, polluting water, and what is also the consequent management on private sector pollution.
Right.
So that's something that needs to be done.
Minister, I'm going to give it the final word. I understand that this week, I think there's going to be a briefing with regards to some of the findings from certain municipalities. But the point being made here is consequence management. What is being done for those who are defaulting?
Let me start with a point that is a little bit outside your question, so that the public is not left in despair. We have introduced a new interpretation of the Water Services Act where you can actually separate between a water service authority and a water service provider. It's new in the sense that it has not been operationalized. Almost all water service authorities are at the same time water service providers, and it's not working out for water. We're now saying, let's separate this thing. A water service authority must appoint and can appoint and should appoint a water service provider who will specialize on water, including meters, billings, collection, and keeping the money there so that money comes back to build, to replace the next pipe that is becoming old, build another reservoir, and then build another pump station so that people have reliable supply of water. And this is this will be a new development that will improve water provision, which, if I could go to use the word crisis, South Africans, including WaterCAN, including the media, they have a right. I mean, we are a democracy to use the word crisis to describe the challenge. But for us who are in the sector, we see it more as an issue where you have a problem on the water supply side than on the water resource side.
So you don't see it as a crisis?
Pardon?
You don't see it as a crisis?
I'm saying that's not the only word that could apply. I'm just saying South Africans are free to say on the supply side, that's where South Africa is experiencing more problems than on the water resource side. Now, we can interpret it the way we would want it to say, on the water supply side, we have a crisis. I'm saying people have a right to use that description and so on. But I'm saying at the same time, we shouldn't just leave South Africans with a crisis situation and not say what we're doing now as government. Apart from all these interventions which by the way are working, they are working. We now have to move to a a water service provider era, where water is provided on a specialist professional basis, as opposed to what is happening now. Because when you appoint a municipal manager, you don't ask for water qualifications. And so he will sit there, manage this and that. And then you need specialization, you need professionalism. You need to ring-fence money. You need to look at water, reinvest money in water in that municipality.
Just before, I've got 30 seconds left. The consequence issues, where does that fall within this?
Well, it falls with municipalities themselves. Remember, they're a totally different sphere of government. Now, you can come in and out in any way you want. Even the interventions that we're making, better now. People have become very receptive of us going down to say, let's work in this way, let's work to turn things around. But otherwise, the law doesn't allow. We're reviewing the law itself.
Time also doesn't allow us to further this conversation, but no doubt we will be discussing this. I understand there's going to be a briefing this week.
Yes, on Tuesday.
On Tuesday?
Yes.
We will look forward to that. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Adams, as well. Philile Ntuli, as well as our digital audience. Value added, no doubt. The conversation continues. Thank you very much indeed for your time. All right, before we go, here's my take. And I often hear people saying, I can manage without the electricity, but not without water, right? It talks to how precious this resource is, but that shouldn't be the standard, by the way, either or. We should have access to water and electricity, period. Water is mentioned explicitly in the Constitution, and municipalities have the responsibility to make sure that services are provided. Read up on Section 153. A municipality must structure and manage its administration and budgeting and planning processes to give priority to the basic needs of the community. And water and electricity are basic needs. Right? If a municipality is not providing the service, then there should be consequences. You heard it here. Bottom line, again I say, don't play around with legitimate pain and frustration. It's all about command. It's all about the ability to get something done. It's a sense of urgency. I got a sense of urgency here from our discussion tonight. Take your statutory obligations and duties to the people seriously. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this show, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube. Sports Live up next. If you're watching a repeat of the program, then as always, the news continues. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.